September 1877. On a smoke-covered hillside above Kagoshima, a wounded man in worn armor could no longer stand. Below him climbed a modern army, rifles, cannon, conscript soldiers drilled in tactics he himself had once helped design. A decade before, this man had been called the greatest hero of the revolution that ended 7 centuries of samurai rule. Now that same revolution's government had sent an army to kill him, an army built, in part, by his oldest friend. Draw near, traveler, for this is the tale of 2 friends who remade a nation, and how one came to order the death of the other. Long before any of that, he was simply a poor samurai's son from a province at the southern edge of Japan. Saigo Takamori was born in 1828 in Satsuma, a proud domain at the far southern tip of Japan. His family held samurai rank, but only barely too poor to afford good weapons, let alone comfort. As a boy, Saigo was struck across the arm in a fight, an old injury that left him unable to properly grip a sword. So while other samurai sons trained for the blade, he turned instead to books, to argument, and to the loyalty of friends. Among those friends was a quieter, sharper boy named Okubo Toshimichi, who would become the other half of his life story. Satsuma prized a code called Bushido, loyalty, discipline, and a willingness to die before dishonor. Saigo absorbed that code completely, even as the rest of Japan around him was beginning, slowly, to crack apart. For over 250 years, Japan had been ruled not by its emperor, but by a military dynasty called the Tokugawa Shogunate. The emperor lived in quiet ceremonial isolation in Kyoto, honored in name, while the shogun in Edo held all real power. In 1853, American warships under Commodore Perry forced Japan open to the outside world at gunpoint. The shogunate's inability to resist these foreign ships shattered its aura of invincibility almost overnight. Across Japan, ambitious young samurai began to whisper a dangerous new idea: restore the emperor and end the shogun's rule entirely. In Satsuma, Saigo rose quickly through his domain's service, valued for his blunt honesty and his gift for winning loyalty. His lord noticed him, trusted him, and sent him into the dangerous political currents building in Kyoto and Edo. For his outspoken loyalty to the emperor's cause, Saigo was twice arrested and twice exiled to remote southern islands. He nearly died there of illness and despair, before Satsuma finally recalled him when the domain needed him most. By the 1860s, 2 rival domains, Satsuma and Choshu, had emerged as the shogunate's most dangerous enemies. Yet Satsuma and Choshu deeply distrusted each other, having fought bitterly just years before over the same cause. Saigo, alongside his old friend Okubo, worked patiently to bring these bitter rivals into a single alliance. In 1866, the secret Satcho Alliance was finally sealed, uniting Japan's 2 strongest domains against the shogun. Saigo commanded Satsuma's forces personally, leading troops in the fighting that finally broke the shogunate's armies. In 1868, the last shogun surrendered, and the young Meiji emperor was restored to genuine political power. Saigo Takamori, the poor samurai's son from Satsuma, was now one of the most powerful men in a reborn Japan. For a brief moment, it seemed the old samurai world and the new nation might rise together, side by side. The new Meiji government moved fast, determined to modernize Japan before any foreign power could exploit its weakness. Okubo Toshimichi became one of its most powerful architects, pushing hard for Western-style industry, taxation, and military reform. Saigo, meanwhile, was placed in charge of building Japan's first modern conscript army, recruiting commoners as well as samurai. It was a strange irony that would haunt the rest of his life. The samurai who armed the men who trained ordinary peasants to fight. Both men, once inseparable friends, now sat together at the very center of the new government they had built. But beneath the surface, a deep disagreement was already forming about what kind of nation Japan should actually become. Okubo believed old traditions like the samurai class must eventually give way entirely to a modern, efficient state. Seigo believed something essential, honor, loyalty, meaning itself, would be lost if that transformation moved too fast, too carelessly. In 1873, a diplomatic insult from neighboring Korea sparked a fierce debate inside the Meiji government. Some ministers wanted immediate military invasion. Seigo proposed something else. He would go himself, unarmed, as an envoy. He half expected, even hoped, that Korea would execute him for the insult, giving Japan just cause for war. It was, in his own words, an offering of his own life, so that thousands of soldiers might not have to die instead. But Okubo and other senior ministers, newly returned from touring Western nations, overruled him completely. Japan was still too weak, they argued, to risk a foreign war over pride and honor alone. Outvoted and humiliated by the very government he had helped build, Seigo resigned every post he held. Nearly 600 officers and officials resigned alongside him, in loyalty to the man, not merely the cause. Saigo Takamori turned his back on the capital and rode south, home to Satsuma and away from Okubo forever. Back in Satsuma, Seigo settled into a quiet life of hunting, farming, and teaching, far from national politics. But hundreds of young samurai, angry and disillusioned, followed him home, eager for purpose and a teacher to follow. Seigo founded private academies across Satsuma, teaching not just swordsmanship, but his personal philosophy of duty. He called it Kaiten Eijin, revere heaven, love mankind, a simple creed he tried, imperfectly, to live by. He once wrote that a man who desires nothing for himself can accomplish almost anything worth accomplishing. Within a few years, these academies held tens of thousands of young men, loyal to Seigo far more than to Tokyo. The Meiji government in Tokyo watched this growing private army in Satsuma with rising, quiet alarm. And Okubo, now the most powerful man in that government, understood exactly what his old friend had become. Across Japan, the Meiji government was rapidly dismantling the very samurai class that had built the new nation. Hereditary stipends, paid to samurai families for generations, were abolished and replaced with meager one-time bonds. In 1876, the Heitorei Edict banned samurai from publicly wearing their swords at all, the very symbol of their identity. For men who had built their entire lives around that blade and its meaning, it felt like an amputation. Across the country, scattered samurai uprisings broke out in protest, each one crushed swiftly by the new conscript army. In Satsuma, Seigo's students watched these crushed rebellions and grew increasingly desperate for their own teacher to act. Seigo himself hesitated, still hoping some peaceful accommodation with Tokyo might yet be possible. But the young men around him were no longer willing to wait patiently for an accommodation that never seemed to come. In early 1877, Tokyo secretly sent police agents into Satsuma, worried the domain was arming for open rebellion. Satsuma students captured several of these agents and, under questioning, extracted a shocking confession. One agent confessed, or was made to confess, to a secret plot to assassinate Saigo Takamori himself. Whether the confession was true or coerced, the effect on Satsuma's furious young samurai was immediate. Without waiting for Seigo's formal order, his students stormed a nearby government arsenal, seizing rifles and gunpowder. Seigo, informed of the raid after the fact, reportedly sighed and said his life was no longer his own to control. He had spent years trying to avoid this exact moment, and now it had arrived entirely without his permission. Reluctantly, but completely, Seigo agreed to lead the rebellion his students had already begun without him. In February 1877, an army of roughly 15,000 Satsuma samurai marched north, toward the government garrison at Kumamoto. It was, in truth, the largest and best organized samurai army Japan had seen in over 2 centuries. Waiting for them was Kumamoto Castle, a formidable fortress garrisoned by government conscript troops loyal to Tokyo. Seigo expected a quick victory, certain that the government's peasant conscripts would break before real samurai resolve. Instead, the conscript garrison held the walls with stubborn, disciplined determination for weeks on end. Seigo's samurai, brilliant with the blade, found themselves increasingly outmatched by rifles, artillery, and telegraph coordination. In Tokyo, Okubo Toshimichi personally organized the massive relief effort, determined to crush his old friend's rebellion completely. A relief army, tens of thousands strong, backed by rifles, warships, and modern logistics, marched to break the siege. After nearly 2 months, the siege of Kumamoto finally broke, and Seigo's exhausted army was forced to retreat. What followed was 7 months of brutal, grinding retreat across the mountains of southern Japan. Seigo's army, once 15,000 strong, shrank with every battle, every skirmish, every desertion. Government forces pursued relentlessly, superior in numbers, weapons, supply, and above all, sheer industrial capacity. Yet still, Seigo's remaining loyalists refused to surrender, bound to him by something deeper than any military logic. By late summer, barely a few hundred exhausted fighters remained of the once mighty Satsuma rebellion. They circled back, at last, toward the city of Kagoshima, the very heart of Satsuma itself and home. There, on a small hill overlooking the city called Shiroyama, Seigo's remaining men made their final camp. Below them, a government army of many thousands slowly, methodically surrounded the hill entirely. On the night before the final assault, Seigo reportedly spent his last hours calmly, composing poetry with his remaining officers. At dawn on September 24th, 1877, the government army's cannon opened fire on the hillside. Fewer than 400 remaining samurai charged directly into the guns of an army tens of thousands strong. Seigo himself, still recovering from an earlier wound, was struck again, this time critically in the hip and thigh. He could no longer walk, and his officers carried him to a quiet spot away from the worst of the fighting. There, according to those present, Seigo composed himself, straightened his robes, and faced south toward the palace and bowed. He asked a loyal officer, a childhood friend, to end his suffering quickly and to spare him capture. His friend, weeping, did as he was asked, and Saigo Takamori died on the hillside he had once called home. Word of Seigo's death reached Tokyo within days, carried swiftly along the telegraph lines the new Japan had built. Okubo Toshimichi, the friend who had built the very army that killed him, reportedly wept alone when he heard. Whatever their bitter political differences, the two men had once been the closest of childhood friends. Okubo had won completely. His vision of Japan, modern and industrial, had utterly defeated his old friend's world. Less than a year later, Okubo himself was assassinated by samurai still loyal to Seigo's memory. Neither friend, in the end, outlived the revolution they had built together by more than a handful of years. In the years after his death, something unexpected happened. The rebel Saigo Takamori was quietly forgiven. In 1889, the Meiji Emperor himself granted Seigo a full posthumous pardon, restoring his honor completely. A great bronze statue of Seigo was raised in Ueno Park. In the very capital, his rebellion had failed to reach. Strangely, no verified photograph of Saigo Takamori has ever survived, not one taken during his actual life. The familiar portrait known today was pieced together after his death, blending the faces of his own relatives. In a strange way, even his face became a legend, remembered by everyone, verified by no one at all. Today, he is remembered less as a rebel than as a symbol, the last true samurai, honor before survival. Saigo Takamori helped build the very Japan that ultimately had no place left for men like him. He was not fighting simply against progress itself, but against a future built too quickly, without room for meaning. His own creed, Kaiten Ajin, still hangs in homes and halls across Japan, long after the empire he served has changed entirely. He desired nothing for himself in the end, not even a photograph to remember his own face by. And on a quiet hillside above Kagoshima, where cherry trees now bloom each spring over old, forgotten trenches, the last samurai still rests, not far from where he once told a friend that his life was no longer his own. Sleep now and remember that some men lose the world by holding on too tightly to what it once meant to be true.